since you come from our suburb, it'll be interesting to hear like which IHOP did you go to?
Exactly.
That was the thing. Did you go to IHOP?
Oh, for sure. IHOP and Waffle House. Welcome back to a new episode of Southern Fried Asian. I am your host, Keith Chow. Happy to be back on the podcast. I'm not going to front. One of the reasons I started Southern Fried Asian is so that I would have an excuse to talk to today's guest about growing up in Virginia Beach and being on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. So that's my insider secret. Today's guest is the actress Michelle Krusiec. Some of her credits include TV shows like Hawaii Five-0, Fringe, Community. She's also appeared in films such as Nixon, and of course the classic Asian American film Saving Face. This is a really fun conversation. It's the first time I ever had a guest who was from the same part of the South that I'm from, so it may get a little insidery in parts, but please sit back, relax, and check out my conversation with Michelle Krusiec. Joining us on the line is an accomplished actress on stage, screen, movies, and television. You know her from her lead role in the classic Asian American film Saving Face. Please welcome to Southern Fried Asian, Michelle Krusiec.
Hello everybody. Hello.
Fellow Virginian. First time I get to have someone who knows my hometown on the podcast.
Yeah, I feel like there's like a handful, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're out there like minions or something.
Well, we have to represent the 757. That's where we come from. Just to get it out of the way, you are not originally, but grew up most of your life in Virginia Beach, right?
That's right. I mean, that's not where I was born, but that's basically where I would call like my, where I'm from, basically. Mm-hmm. If someone were to just say, where'd you grow up in the States? Right.
And then you say the 7 cities and they don't know what you're talking about, so you have to be more specific.
Oh my gosh, I don't even... Oh, you're talking about Hampton Roads?
Yeah.
7 cities? Yeah.
757, all these nicknames that we have for our neighborhoods and towns.
Yeah, I can't even say Hampton Roads without it feeling kind of alien. That's kind of a weird way of calling it. But yeah, I do know that that's what the area is called.
It's like Hampton Roads, it's like Tidewater, I think is another...
Yeah, Tidewater. Yeah, it's
weird.
But
reference.
Aren't all those names just kind of? I don't know. They're not very sexy. None of those names are sexy.
Where did you grow up? Tidewater. That's where I grew up.
Yeah, Tidewater.
That was like the community college in the area.
That's right, Tidewater. There was Waterside, but that sounds a lot cooler. But Waterside was in Norfolk.
That was where all the tourists went. That the few tourists who did come and didn't go to the beach would go to like Waterside downtown. Yeah, this is going to be just fair warning to everyone out there listening. This is probably going to be just Michelle and I talking about our favorite like hangout spots growing up. So
yeah, this will be like, I feel like this might be a truly indie conversation.
Well, let's start from the very beginning, to quote The Sound of Music. What brought you to Virginia?
Well, really, it's the work of my father, because he was in the Navy, and I basically was adopted by my American father, who, okay, it's a little bit convoluted, so let me just go back. I was born in Taiwan, but I was adopted by my biological aunt, and she was married to her husband, who is Caucasian, and so he adopted me, and when I refer to my parents, they're my biological aunt and uncle. So he adopted me, and we basically were, we were a Navy family, and there was a base in Norfolk and Portsmouth. It's a big military town, military area. So I was a military brat, and so we moved to Virginia Beach, and that's where he ended up getting stationed. And he got shore duty, and that's when you get off of a ship, and then you're now basically, you don't have to go out to sea every 6 months. Right. So you're basically, you have a place to stay while he's still serving the military.
And that was your home base in Virginia Beach, and you went to school there, high school.
Yeah.
Before we started recording, we literally were reminiscing about some of the places we used to go. We didn't actually know each other. We're around the same age. We didn't know each other growing up in Virginia Beach, but we are very familiar with a lot of the same spots. We have a mutual friend whose family owned a couple restaurants in the area, and you actually helped them out.
Yeah. I mean, our mutual friend, I love him, so it's nothing against his family, but I think I was really, really young when I started working. I was 12.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's typical, I think, of any Chinese kid, right?
Chinese kid, yeah, exactly. It's like, you walk, you go work.
Yeah. No such thing as child labor laws in Asian families.
No. And, I was very happy to, because it was the only social life I had. And I remember it starting with my mom taking me to work, and she was a bartender at this friend of ours, the restaurant, this Chinese restaurant that his father owned. She was the bartender, and I remember going to work with her, and I would basically sit in the the storage closet.
Yeah.
And I would sit in the storage closet, and I don't know what I did, but I remember just reading boxes and boxes of bamboo shoots and dry noodles. And I would just sit there all day. Well, not all day, but for, maybe a good 4 or 5 hours. And that's what I would do. And then eventually when I got older, which was maybe 12, I started working there.
Yeah. No, same. I mean, when I was a similar age, even younger, my family... So I before I came down to Tidewater, we lived in Page County, Virginia, which is deep in the heart of the Shenandoah Valley in, northwestern part of the state. And my family had a Chinese restaurant there. And from birth, basically, until I was about 15 years old, I would be at this place. And then when we moved down to the Chesapeake, Virginia Beach area, my parents branched out and they opened their own restaurant in Chesapeake. Theirs was called Jade Garden. Chinese people love their gardens.
Wait. So where was Jade Garden?
So there was actually 2 different Jade Gardens in the
there's one on the junction of Virginia Beach Boulevard,
right? In in the Green Run area or something. And we actually owned one in Chesapeake, right on Battlefield Boulevard. We would catch all of the folks who were driving down to Nags Head to come, and they would stop by and eat at our restaurant. But people would get us confused because we would get calls from people out in Virginia Beach asking for delivery, and we'd be like, "No, we don't go out that far. Different restaurant." So yeah, not a lot of creativity when it comes to Chinese restaurant names in the area.
No, that was in my one-person show, which we were kind of talking about. That was kind of the thing I always joked as a child. I was like, why is every Chinese restaurant named essentially the same thing?
And it's the same, the Chinese characters are even the same, and it's crazy. But no, I grew up in an office. We sat in an office when I was a little kid at my parents' restaurant, and then when my younger brother was basically the same deal in a storage closet. He would watch a little tiny television in the storage closet, and then when he turned old enough, he would also... Actually, even when he was 8 years old, he would take people's money at the register, and it was so adorable, and no one questioned the the violations by making an 8-year-old work.
Yeah, of course. No, I mean, I wonder, that is so much my childhood. I wonder what it would have been like. I don't know, what is a real childhood?
Nobody knows. No one knows.
But the good thing, I remember always looking forward to the free soup that I would get. And it was always the best egg drop soup or hot and sour soup. And I remember I'd be just, eating. Wait, can I? This is so silly. Can I cuss on here?
Yes. Oh, yes. We have the E on iTunes. So
the E on. Okay.
Curse your heart's content.
I mean, I would eat the shit out of some soup, dude. But whenever the boss would come by, my mom would do a shh, right. And then I would cover the soup. Because it was my 10th bowl, and of course I'm what? I'm 9 years old. What's he going to do? Tell your kid to stop eating us out of our soup. But they're fond memories, even though it was, as you say, it was child labor once I started working there. I really did enjoy being there.
Yeah, and I wonder, as someone who did grow up in a Chinese restaurant, and they served a lot of quote-unquote Americanized Chinese food. I know we did. What is your opinion of that? Because I've talked on this podcast a few times in the past that, like, I actually hold, some fond memories of that type of food. Where do you fall in that kind of General Tso's chicken versus, like, quote unquote authentic Chinese food?
I'm a foodie, so I mean, I'm kind of the general mind that if it tastes good, it's good.
Right.
And I feel like American food is such a bastardization and such a mix of so many different flavors and cultures that whether you call it Americanized or not, I don't know. I mean, I have been to China and I've eaten some food where I'm like, oh, they really do use the same kind of thick white sauce, and a thick brown sauce. I wouldn't say that some of the ingredients are the same, but the flavors are very similar,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not too, that's not really it's not really that big of a deal for me in terms of what people talk about in terms of the Americanized Chinese thing.
Right.
I do think that Taiwanese food, however, is a whole other echelon, if I may say so myself.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, and that's the thing about what's great about, like, Chinese food in general, whether it's Chinese food from mainland China or, southern Chinese food, which is like dim sum and Cantonese cooking, which is what my family did, to Taiwanese food where you get like Taiwanese people can do some pork chops and fried chicken, let me tell you. As a southerner, as a Chinese Asian southerner, I do appreciate Taiwanese fried chicken and Taiwanese pork chops.
Oh my gosh, Taiwanese fried chicken is so delicious. I think about it. Like there are times when it just pops into my head. It's just there's that salty flavor it's just so uniquely Taiwanese. Yeah, you're gonna get me all hungry.
Well, and it's funny. Usually we end on the food conversation, but because you and I kind of grew up in Chinese restaurants, I guess there's no better place than to start at the Chinese food.
Right. So what was your parents' specialty? What was
at the restaurants that my family ran, it was Americanized Chinese food, but my parents both came from Hong Kong, so when we weren't serving customers, we would eat more traditional, like, Cantonese style food. Like, although one of the foods, I think you even mentioned it in your one woman show, is like the sticky rice that's wrapped in I don't know if it's a banana leaf or... Yeah,
it's a banana... Yeah, we call it bazang, which is the Taiwanese.
Yeah. So it's Cantonese is similar. I'm not going to try to say it because I'll just embarrass myself because I speak terrible Cantonese and I don't want my family members to mock me. And that's the reason I don't speak Cantonese anymore. It's because they all mock me when I try. but yeah, so like that would be the... and it's terrible for me because I'm actually allergic to shellfish. And as a Cantonese person, like, basically can't eat half the menu at a Cantonese restaurant. But it's all good. I still love it all.
Well, I definitely feel like the only one food that I didn't understand was egg foo young. Like, to me, that was the one thing where I don't think I've ever really seen an egg foo young dish, to be honest.
Like drenching it in the brown gravy.
Yeah.
You didn't get it?
I guess that's what it is. It's probably got some egg in it, right?
Right. It's basically, we did it as like it was a fried omelet, like a deep fried omelet, basically, and then you put it over rice and drench it in gravy. It's delicious.
Very southern. That's very southern.
That's the thing about being a Southern Asian, man.
There was this place we used to go to because I went to a magnet school, and it was in Norfolk, and across the street. Like, like anytime as a kid you could go and eat out.
Right.
It was like just, like such a treat. Because I always grew up with such, my mom always cooked amazing food at home, but I would kill for like Chef Boyardee's or, like McDonald's.
Yeah.
Any kind of food that was not Chinese was like, oh my gosh, I just need to get me some raviolis. But we would go to this magnet school, and before school started, we went to this little Chinese place across the street, and this was like on Hampton Boulevard or something like that. I can't remember. But I remember their menu used to be like French fry. Yeah. And I remember my friends would order, they'd go, I would like 2 French fry. And I would be, I would stop and I'd be like, I can't tell if I should be offended or if I should tell them to knock it off, but everybody would go up there and they would say, we want 2 French fry. And then they would repeat it. It was really awful. But,
yeah.
that Chinese place, I remember being very fond of it because they had everything on the menu. They had Chinese food, hamburgers,
Right.
fries.
I mentioned earlier where I grew up in the Shenandoah Valley. It's like this really small town in Page County, Virginia, and this is when I was really little. And we actually took my grandfather took over this restaurant called Brown's, which had been in Luray. That's where I'm from, for generations. And then this Chinese family in the 70s came in and took it over. And we actually kept the name. We kept it named Brown's. We just called it Brown's Chinese American Restaurant. And our menu was half Chinese food and half like spaghetti, steak, cheeseburgers. And so there was a sizable portion of the clientele that came in and only ordered the American food, you know, but just prepared by these Chinese people. You know what I mean? But like for decades, the same family would come in and order like spaghetti and a super cheeseburger and never even touch the Chinese side of the menu.
Well,
yeah, it was
that's
crazy.
because you guys were ahead of your time. Because like my babysitter, she's El Salvadorian, and she says some of the best pupusas she gets is from a North Korean guy. So you guys are just ahead of your time.
I guess
you
so.
were already making just food with outside of your own comfort zone.
Like maybe that's what it was. Well, and the thing about Norfolk, and I actually went to college. I went to Old Dominion, so I know Hampton Boulevard fairly well. And there was a Chinese spot, and any kind of like hood Chinese food though is it's its own kind of like yeah.
It was a little place outside of, in front of DU on Hampton, and it was next to a Euro place, a Greek place that had amazing steak fries.
As a Virginia Beach high school student, when did you decide you wanted to be an actress? Where did you go from like the little girl in the storage room at the Chinese restaurant to I want to be an actress? What was that journey like?
Well, I actually met my first agent at that Chinese restaurant.
Oh, really?
And I was 12, like I said, I was working already, and I was selling dim sum in the main, room. And I encountered this little old lady who asked me, she said, "Are you interested in doing some television?" And I was like, "Oh my God, of course," because, I was already, had dreams of being Madonna in my bedroom, and as every young adolescent child at that time would. And so she basically invited me to get some headshots done, and I went home and told my dad, and we did the whole headshot thing, and then she took me on as a young, actor, and I started going out for commercials and print work. And that's where that journey started on a professional level. Mm-hmm. But then when I was 15, I had been interested in drama, but I decided to audition for the magnet school that I was telling you about earlier. Mm-hmm. And I got into the theater department, and then I started training as an actor. And then in college is when I decided, okay, I'm going to also study this in college as an undergrad.
And you stayed in Virginia. You went to Virginia Tech for college.
Yeah. I mean, I had aspirations of going to maybe a big drama school, but money was always a big issue for my family. I was paying my own way, and I had to do everything off of scholarships, and staying in state would have made everything really cheap. And I think I went to UVA, toured it. I got into UVA and then considered going there, but then Virginia Tech offered me a theater scholarship, and so I decided to go where the arts were. So I did that and studied theater arts and English as an undergrad. And then one summer, I got a scholarship to study at Oxford University, and that was also the same summer that I met Oliver Stone at the college. Mm-hmm. And I ended up auditioning for him for Nixon. And that summer, I went to Oxford, studied, and made the movie Nixon, and realized, I really want to act, and I really want to give this thing a shot. So I made this 5-year plan and decided to stop straddling academics and the arts and just devote myself totally to the arts for 5 years at least to see where that would lead me. And that's basically what started my career.
And so that was your very first role in Nixon?
Yeah, that was my first major Hollywood production. I think until then I had done little things, like I had done really bad industrials in the area. Like I still have, I don't know, there was like a Ford commercial that I did.
Like local to Virginia Beach?
Yes, exactly. Very local. I did industrials where, you taught people how to do things. And I did print work for the magazine Portfolio, which was sort of like the Hampton Roads LA Weekly, essentially.
Yeah. That's one way to put it.
Yeah, exactly. And I even auditioned. Oh, I did. The only time I've ever done extra work was on this movie called Vanishing Sun.
Yeah, the Russell Wong.
Yeah, it came through town, and
really?
I did background work on it, and they treated me so horribly that I remember leaving that day going, I'm never going to be an extra again. I vowed. They were just so mean to me. So I was like, I'm never going to, no matter what happens, I'm not going to put myself through that again.
The role that I remember seeing you for the very first time is, speaking of my brother watching television in the closet at our restaurant, we were both sitting in that closet and we were watching Deep Space Nine.
Oh, yeah.
And from the episode where Molly O'Brien, who is Miles and Keiko's daughter, she was a child on the show, she gets in some sort of transporter accident and becomes a feral adult, and you played Molly O'Brien for an episode. That was the very first time I think I ever saw you on television.
Well, that was my first job in Los Angeles.
Really?
Yeah. I had done a hosting gig for the Discovery Channel.
Right, that's right.
There's around the world.
I remember that. What was this, like World Travelers or something?
Yeah. So I did that for essentially 2 years and then moved from Virginia Beach to Los Angeles during the filming of that show. And so Deep Space Nine was basically the first job I got after having made that move. So I was living in, I was living in West LA at the time. Mm. And I was going to say that at the time, one of my first spots that I lived in Los Angeles was across from Leonardo DiCaprio's mom's house. Uh-huh. And I remember calling my dad and telling him, Dad, Leo DiCaprio's mom lives across the street from me. And he'd be like, who is that? And I'm like, Leo DiCaprio? And he would say, when are you going to be on Star Trek? And finally I made the call and I was like, I'm going to be on Star Trek.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So,
I mean, was that even in the cards, or was your dad just like a big Trekkie and wanted you to be on Star Trek if you're going to be an actor?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, he was a huge Trekkie. We were all Trekkies. I grew up watching, of all of the Star Treks. Uh-huh. Nine, Voyager, all that stuff. I grew up watching all that.
So what was that like being on the show, even if it was just one episode?
It was interesting because it was my first job in Los Angeles. And, it was that whole thing of people get on a series and they seemed really angry and bitter. And nobody wanted to be there is my impression.
Right.
And I was this eager, wide-eyed, like, oh my God, I'm so happy to be alive. Somebody's hired me to throw myself up against an imaginary wall pretending to be feral, Molly O'Brien. And everybody else was like, you need to calm down and just go over there. So it was a bit of a shocker, but then I realized, I guess this is just what happens.
That's set life, man.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's rewind though back to being in Virginia, since ostensibly this is Southern Fried Asian. First of all, do you consider yourself a Southerner? Is that something that is part of your identity at all?
Yes and no. When I was in Virginia, I remember people asking me who won the Civil War, and I because
that's still up for debate in the South in some parts.
Yes, I think so. And I remember saying, well, we did. And then I remember people looking at me like, well, what do you mean? And then I realized that I was always kind of siding with the Northerners, right. But I forgot that I was living in the South. So that attitude was not, really the norm. So I remember that always being a conundrum for me because I never understood what people were saying. Mm. So, I feel like I grew up in the South, but I've always considered myself as being fairly progressive. Right. So I don't see myself as a Southerner, but for some reason I understand the Southern. Not for some reason. I grew up in the South, so I understand the Southern mentality. But I do think that Virginia Beach and Hampton Roads was much more neutral, like when it came to voting, and we would vote more democratically on a national level and more Republican on a local level.
Right, right.
But it would always go either way, and I always thought that was really kind of interesting about the area I grew up in. You saw that in this last round of elections where you weren't sure were they going to go red or blue.
Right. Well, and one of the things that I always find about talking to other Southerners, especially like progressive Southerners, is this idea that, to the detriment, I think, of progressive politics, that oftentimes people do kind of dismiss whole swaths of the country and assume that because it's the South, it's this deep red state, and we don't even need to compete down there because they're all racist who are going to only vote for like the racist white guy. And as you said, there are pockets of progressive minded people throughout the South, and the last special election in Alabama showed that if you run in some of these places and you have a positive message, you don't have to just assume that the entire whole part of the country is lost.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was a really unique. I think it was a great place to grow up. I think being Asian American in that area was not so interesting because I did identify with being more white than Asian, or at least outside of my home. I felt like I was seeing the world filtered through, kind of just being white. And then inside my house was a very different world. I was very Chinese, and I lived a very sort of private life where you didn't really share amongst your friends what was going on with the family.
Right,
so I felt like I feel like it was a place where you could be very bicultural.
That's interesting that it's almost as if you grew up mixed race, even though you weren't technically mixed race, but because your adoptive father was white, you did have almost like a Hoppe experience growing up.
Yeah, I would say so. And especially with my mom, I think because she was always displaced emotionally and culturally as having immigrated here well into her adulthood. I think for her, she really wanted me to assimilate so that I didn't experience any kind of racism. And so she was always very vocal about trying not to, rock the boat and passing me off as Hoppe if people mistook me as Hoppe. And, it wasn't until I kind of moved to Los Angeles that I was really surprised that there was so many Asian people. And I didn't realize that it had impacted my experience growing up quite a bit. I just didn't realize it. I laughed at jokes that were aimed at Asians because I kind of identified in that way for so long. I didn't date Asian men for a very long time, a long period of my life because I identified, with, they remind me of my brother. I would have these very sort of like, these sort of conflicted moments where I was confused, like, well, I don't know, that's just how I feel, and then I realized, when you grow up not having yourself reflected,
right,
you're going to see yourself in a certain way.
When whiteness is the default, that's what you default to.
Yeah. And I didn't realize that until way into my, way into my 20s, because I thought I was fairly progressive. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I also think because of my generation, you didn't really talk about feeling alienated because that made you look weak if you talked about feeling uncomfortable or invisible. You always wanted to seem like you were strong and dealing with it, and everything was, not a big deal. And that was sort of the kind of take it like a man approach. Until recently, I never really talked about, not vocally, not in a way that was sort of activist, where I talked about what it's like being Asian in America. It wasn't until recent that I started to realize, I don't think I've really been that honest with people about what that was like growing up, Taiwanese or Chinese in a mostly white area.
Right. Because that's the thing, Virginia Beach is, like any community, pretty bifurcated in terms of like the demographics of where you live. So there are parts of Virginia Beach that are very white. There are parts of Virginia Beach that are majority black. There are parts of Virginia Beach that are actually heavily Filipino, interestingly. I think a lot of people don't understand that. You know, for me, I as I said, I grew up in the mountains of Virginia, so we literally were the only Asians for miles. And for me, like, the culture shock for me was actually moving, and I spoke about this in a previous episode, moving from Luray to Chesapeake and then going to school and seeing other Asians that I wasn't related to was mind-blowing. And it was almost like other Asians didn't want to associate with me because it's like, you know, for me, I'm like, whoa, there's other Asian people. And the other Asians are like, get away, dude. Like, you know, we ain't hanging out. You know what I mean? It's just, which was new for me because it used to be like, you know, you would just zero in on the other person who looked like you, and then you can't do that. One, because you're in high school, and two, like, you're not special to them.
Right. And also, I don't know if this was true for you, but having only been part of a handful and always being sort of the odd person out culturally, you never wanted to be in a group because then you would get targeted. Right.
Well, and yeah, definitely. And for me too, because like my parents, so we moved to Hampton Roads, and then when we was kind of like established down there, my mother's side of the family had all immigrated to America in the 70s, but my father's side of the family didn't start coming to America until the 90s, until we had moved down in Virginia Beach. So by the time I was in high school and you know, early college, all of my dad's brothers and sisters had also moved to like the Chesapeake, Virginia Beach, Norfolk area. And so whenever we'd go out to eat on the weekends, we'd roll like 20 deep into a dim sum restaurant. And it was, and then, you know, afterwards we'd go to the mall, and it was just like, you felt self-conscious when you're like a 17-year-old with like all of these aunties and uncles around, you know what I mean? And walking in this massive herd through the mall, and you just wanted to break off and like hope none of your friends saw you, you know what I mean?
Right. Well, it's 2018 now, and I still feel that way when I go back there. You know, I still feel like my brother and I, because my mom still lives there, when we go back to visit, when we go through the mall, he's always joking to me, let's see how many people think you're my wife, you know? And it's because just being visible and in numbers reminds us what it was like growing up there. And, you know, there was never a feeling of like direct racism. It was always these kind of subverted questions like, you know, what do Chinese people like to do for free, you know, on the weekends? Or, you know, it's just those kind of questions where you're like, I can't believe I'm going to answer this. And people are really pleasant and sincere there, but I couldn't say that I would say the spectrum of being exposed to different cultures is a little bit, maybe not what I would ascribe as completely complex.
Yeah, no, and I think a lot of times too, as an Asian American in the South, because the South is also very, like a lot of race relations in America, right? It's either very black or very white, and then Asian Americans or Asians in general just don't necessarily fit in either, and that's, I think, even more pronounced in areas of the South. And I think one of the things that surprised me the most was when I came to Virginia Beach and seeing like Filipino American culture, like. It blew my mind because it was like there's actually an in-between space. And they are the leaders there. Yeah. They were cool in my school. Yeah. They could dance, they could sing. You know, they were the cool people. They had sort of made it. They were like the Indians of our time. And, you know, I felt like if you were Filipino, then you had it made. Yeah. There was something about Filipinos in my high school that I felt like they were their own thing, you know? Yeah, it was weird, too, because, like, it's funny, when I was living in Luray, we were the only Asians in the town. I mean, it was a small town, so there was never, like, a sense of ostracization there. But then coming to, like, where it was ostensibly more diverse is when I started feeling like, oh, okay, there's definitely, like, a hierarchy of even just, like, Asian folks, right? So, like, the more fobby, quote-unquote, Chinese folks would be down on the bottom of the rung, right? But yeah, then you did have like for the first time I saw like cool Asian people, and it was crazy. Like I never because there was no, as you said, if you turn on television or in the movies, we didn't have Fresh Off the Boat when we were growing up. We didn't have hot Asian guys in the movies when we were growing up. The only Asian guys on a movie screen was Getty Watanabe, right, in 16 Candles. So, like, there was this lack of kind of role models. But then you did see, like, the cool kids were Asian in school, and that was a weird concept.
Yeah. Well, that was the thing for me at my school was hip hop was really big in Virginia Beach. I mean, on the East Coast, in terms of hip hop, it was always East Coast hip hop. And in my school, there was quite a few talented artists that came from that area. I went to school with Pharrell, and Chad Hugo of NERD, and they were already kind of doing that thing at that time. Whereas with me, I always felt like I was the geeky Asian kid who was, studying and trying to make money to go to college. And I didn't go out to dances, or I didn't really date. I was always so focused on school. So I was never part of that cool crowd or the cool scene.
Right.
I don't know whether it was just my family per se or just being Asian, but I think for me it was if you put all that together, it felt to me like a very Asian American experience.
Yeah, and a lot of this came up in your one-woman show that you put on in 2010 called Made in Taiwan. What was the impetus for putting that show together, which kind of does illustrate this growing up that you did in Virginia Beach?
Well, it was primarily, basically, I went to school at Virginia Tech, and I was working on a thesis for being part of the honors program there. And my playwriting teacher and I were trying to come up with a project. And basically I combined my efforts, which is I wanted to write a thesis about Asian American identity, and I wanted to write a one-person show for my playwriting class. And so
two birds with one stone, right?
Yeah, basically. So I just did that and ended up writing about my relationship to my mother, which was a very complex one. And from the genesis of that came all of these stories that I ended up telling on the road when I was traveling with my friends on the Discovery Channel. And eventually they would tell me, like, hey, tell this story and tell that story. And then pretty soon I realized I had a bunch of stories. And so I just filed all of that together and decided to make this show. And it was really raw, and it was very funny. And it was also very painful. And when I did it, I guess I didn't realize at the time that it was really about identity. It was about domestic violence. It was about a whole bunch of things. But the fact that it was funny was really kind of what sold it. That's how that show came about. And that show ended up helping me quite a bit in terms of my career. And
that show, you did it in New York and you did it in Los Angeles. Did you do it anywhere else?
No. I mean, I was kind of the only person behind that show. I was when I wasn't working on TV, I would always go back to developing the show, and my goal was to try and get it on the stage. And I would say that show probably would do much better now, because the stories now are much more about personal experiences, whereas back then I felt like if you were an actor, you were just an actor, and if you were a writer, you were just a writer. Whereas these days, you can be an actor and a writer. That's kind of where it's at. And at the time when I created that show, I feel like people were always a little bit weary of, oh, she wrote and performs in this show, so maybe it's just its own thing. Whereas I really did feel like it was really relevant and really universal, and I kind of think that it might do really well in this day and age, because it's very much like, what's very popular right now, Master of None and all of the, and Blackish, and all these shows that are talking about race and culture and identity.
I mean, it's going on almost 10 years now since you did that show for the first time, I think. Would that be something you'd ever want or consider revisiting? Yeah,
I mean, it's something where, funnily enough, I'm now of the age where I could start to play the mom in a real way. So I was, before, it was sort of the protagonist is this young woman who's 16, and but the real fierce character is the mother character, and she was always really quite she was the draw of the show.
Right.
So if I ever revisited it would be to really kind of give her even more heft.
Yeah.
Not that she needs it in the show, but I think there's a whole thing to tiger moms, and she's sort of the quintessential tiger mom, but I don't make her one-dimensional.
Right.
I really tried to make her as compassionate as possible. And I think if I were to revisit it, it would be to talk about that, bring my understanding of being a mom now to the show.
That's an interesting point that you make, and a valid point about like any kind of stereotype is okay so long as that you don't constrict yourself to that stereotype, right? Like there may be Tiger Mom aspects, but because she's still a multi-dimensional, a real human being, right? That's what elevates it from just being a one-note trope character.
Yeah, and I think with Tiger Moms, everybody kind of recognizes it, but I don't know if, I think what makes Asian Americans and immigrants, the whole trope of being an Asian mom and being a very strong mother, I feel like people can see that on the exterior. But the interior life of that, I don't know if people really delved into that in a very complex way, because there's so much happening when you come to a country, you've been displaced, you become disempowered, and at the same time you are trying to empower yourself with all the tools you have, and it's very limited because you generally come to a country and you're not educated here, but you raise these kids to become the super overachievers of future generations, and it's an amazing complex world that I think a lot of us grew up in, but I don't know if we really talk about it in a way that's both deeply funny and deeply painful, because I think most of us are just trying to figure out how to get visibility and function like any other human being. But I think most people's stories, when it comes to Asians, I always feel like I hear one person's tragic story and the next person is always more tragic than the other person.
That's kind of the knock against a lot of like independent Asian American cinema, right? It's like, how do you one up each other's identity crisis? It's like every other notion that there is a single Asian American story, right? Because I think what you illustrate with this is that, yes, there are like layers that are similar, but everyone's individual story is unique and everyone's experience is different, even though there are some overlaps. But your story is an Asian American story, my story is an Asian American story, and we don't have to necessarily have the same Asian American story that you typically get in every other movie or novel, or and one of those those unique Asian American stories is something that you're also a part of, part of the canon, as it were. And one of the classics was the 2004 film Saving Face that you did with our mutual friend Lin Chen and directed by Alice Wu.
Yeah.
What was, you won like awards for that movie. What was that experience like, being part of a film? When you were making it, did you know you were making a movie that was going to go down in the annals of like Asian American cinematic history? to be hyperbolic.
Well, thank you, Keith. I really appreciate that. I did not know that at the time. I think we all knew we had a very special film, because it's very difficult to write a good film, much less a good Asian American film. And we all knew that the script was very special, and Alice was a wonderful director and a really good voice for cinema. I think now, looking back, we could see glimmers of it, but it was so ahead of its time. It was just 1 year prior to Brokeback Mountain. Mm-hmm. And I think if it had come right after Brokeback, I think it would have maybe have made a bigger splash in terms of the mainstream. But I think it's the kind of film where, when you are growing up and looking for some kind of reflection of yourself, it's the film you kind of bump into and discover, and you realize, oh my gosh, this is it's a beautiful romantic comedy and with a happy ending. Yeah. And it's the kind of film that I think a lot of people will come up to me to this day and thank me for, or tell me how it helped them come out. And I am really grateful that Alice gave us that as a gift. Because as an actor at that time, it was mostly in the execution that I was really grateful to her for giving that to me. But I had no had no recognition how long of what kind of legacy it would leave, and I don't mean legacy. I wish I could have a better word, but some kind of thing for future generations.
Yeah,
to just
it is a legacy because I think that film there is a lasting effect of that film, even though I think it came out, like I said, in 2004, so it's some 13, 14 years later, and it's still impactful for people, and it still makes like lists of classic LGBT films, classic Asian American films. It's, talk about an intersectional story. And, you talked about being ahead of your time, and I think that Made in Taiwan, Saving Face also shows that you are also ahead of your time. And as you said, this is a movie that if it came out today, I think would be more widely accepted. Because I think also LGBT culture is better understood now than it was maybe 15 years ago. There's definitely more acceptance. It's more part of the culture. I think Saving Face is one of those films that does have a legacy, that does hold up and is timeless and will be around. Even if people are not LGBT, there are aspects of that film that is universal. And speaks to the notion that the more specific a story is, the more universal it can be. Yeah,
I think so. And I appreciate all those comments you made, because I do think that it's a very important film. And, I think it's always hard to talk about something that you've been a part of. And I mean, I think it was an awesome project. So you're preaching to the choir. But I'm really, because I'm a parent now, and I see what my child, I have a son who's 4, and I see what happens when he watches television. Anything he watches, he starts to adapt it in his imagination. And he always identifies with one or two of the characters, and he wants to become that character. I don't know if it's just part of the way we develop as human beings. I don't know if I just specifically read him something, he would just identify with a character that he reads, or if it's the thing that he's seeing in front of him. But whatever happens for him in his development, he gravitates towards something and he wants to be it.
Right.
And I think if we're going to encourage people to find their individuality and their own voices, I think you have to show them a reflection of many voices. And I think Saving Face does that. And I don't know how many there are now. I mean, obviously it's my industry to look at content and to create content and to watch what content is becoming. Although I don't know. I was going to say that I can't say that diversity is. It's happening now. You know what I mean? I can't say that you have 20 Saving Faces. I would say there's probably a couple. And so I really do think that it is an important film, and I hope it encourages other people who are diverse to try and do more of their own stories. Yeah. I think those are the stories that engage me more so than, say, another
Matt Damon movie. I said it. You said you didn't have to. No, but I think, but does speak to the power of media and representation, and the conversations that have shifted in the last couple of years, particularly for Asian Americans. This is a conversation that I think when you were coming up, when I was consuming this stuff, that it wasn't something that people necessarily discussed. So this is why Saving Face is so prescient, in that it was intersectional back in the early 2000s before people even used that terminology, But this idea of like whitewashing and representation and diversity, like these conversations around Asian American portrayals, I think is something that's shifted only in the last couple of years. And hopefully that shift will continue, and that we will have more opportunities for folks who look like us and look like other folks to be represented and see themselves in these stories. Because as you said, it is powerful to see yourself out there, and that when you don't see yourself, you automatically see less. You see yourself as less than, and you internalize that racism and bigotry. And as people who grew up in the South around other cultures, that's kind of what happens when you are othered, and that's what we have to continue to combat. So this is where we normally shift to talking about food, but since we covered that in the beginning, I would just want to ask you one thing: is that if there was one dish that instantly reminds you of like going back to Virginia Beach, and as you said, you go back quite often, what is that dish?
The one dish I was thinking of is pork chop and eggs, which is what I would always get at Waffle House.
Waffle House. Pork
chop and eggs. 2 eggs over easy with grits.
There you go.
that to me is what reminds me and makes me think of Virginia Beach.
There you go. Which Waffle House?
We would always do, gosh, which one? I always went to the Waffle House after coming back from the Norfolk International Airport. So I think there's like a Waffle House right near, like near Military Highway or on Military Highway. Yeah. And also my dad was so into Waffle House, IHOP. And then do you remember there was like buffets, by the way? We never got to buffets in Virginia Beach.
Oh my God. Yeah. So we actually had a buffet. Like we had a little tiny buffet in ours, but yeah.
Jeez, you had everything in your place.
Well, it was like a 6-tray buffet. It wasn't one of those like dynasty places where you had rows and rows. And that is something that I did notice once I left Virginia Beach. It was like there were still buffets everywhere, but not the amount of buffets that you get down in Virginia Beach. I don't know what it is. People love to eat a whole bunch of. You got like a tray of crab legs.
Well, there used to be a place called Captain George's, and then there was a place called Captain John's.
Captain George's, yes. That's still around, isn't it? I think there's still one left in Virginia Beach. Yeah,
buffet, I would say, would be my next sort of, like, I know it's not one dish, it's all the dishes.
It's all the dishes. Literally all the dishes.
Yeah. So to me, it's that kind of old Southern breakfast, and then the buffet option, which is everything.
They're still around though, right? Like Old Country and.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, we used to go to Old Country Buffet.
Yeah.
That was a huge one, and Captain George's or Captain, which then became Captain John.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember when it was Captain George's, and again, as a shellfish allergic kid, I was like. That was the worst experience because like my my uncles would be like snapping crab legs everywhere, and I just have to like cover my face because it was just flying everywhere.
Yeah. You would just have to kind of surrender to the experience.
Michelle, this has been so fun to like reminisce about Virginia Beach. So if folks wanted to keep up with your work and follow you on social media, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
They can probably just, go to my website, which is michellekrusiec.com, and find me there. I used to blog quite a bit, but I kind of took a break. Mm-hmm. Or they can find me on Facebook on my public page.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much for being part of Southern Fried Asian. Hopefully we can connect in the future, and maybe I'll see you around Virginia Beach at one of the buffets.
That would be awesome. Thank you for having me. This was really a pleasure. Thank you.
That was my conversation with Michelle Krusiec. Thank you for listening. As always, you can subscribe and download Southern Fried Asian on Apple Podcasts and Google Play Music. If you do, please rate and review us so people can find the podcast. Southern Fried Asian is part of the Hard Knock Media podcast family. Other podcasts include Hard Knock Life, Ask By Girls, We're Not All Ninjas, and Daisy Geek Girls. Please tune in and subscribe and download to those as well. Find us online at thenerdsofcolor.org/podcasts. You can also follow us on Twitter at Southern Asians and on Instagram at Southern Fried Asian. You can find me on Twitter at TheRealChow, _real_Chow, and at The Nerds of Color. Thank you for tuning in. And until next time, keep it Southern Fried, y'all.